Well, this story doesn't need a whole lot of introduction. There she is. After the hurricane, I spent most of my time looking for Coke and Nutter Butters. Well, they laughed at me when they saw me working on this thing for 30 days straight. But who's laughing now? Still got nothing on the gauges. So that instrument cluster is gone, city. Let's see what happens if I shut it off. Good morning, this is Joel, live from Fort Myers Beach. After the hurricane, my car was the only one left after a while. People moved out, people's cars got towed away, and the zombies got the rest. So here's where I am at this point. Starting at the back of the car, I have drained and replaced the transmission fluid. I drained the engine of the oil-water combination, which I have on display here next to my Pelican friend, who I found hiding behind a washing machine a few days after the hurricane. So he did just fine. His neck's a little loose now. He's a little rubber-necked. Okay, so today we're having fun with the instrument cluster, or as I should say, clusters, since I have several. Got one over here, got one over here, got my multimeter. I got everything laid out. And hopefully I can make one good cluster out of all these. So I'm taking this apart, and I wanted to just kind of show real quick. A lot of people will use WD-40 to unstick things, and that's not quite right, just because WD-40 was designed for NASA as a water displacement solution that they could put on things that would stop corrosion, because the space shuttles and everything else are in Cape Canaveral or Cape Kennedy, if you're old enough. There's still a lot of humidity in the air, and obviously that humidity gets onto electrical contacts. Now, this instrument cluster went through a hurricane and was submerged in water for a couple hours. So you can see especially in this area here. There's a lot of rust and corrosion. So basically what I'm going to do is the plastic part should be fine. And I've got a plethora of spare parts. I've got about 3 instrument clusters worth of dials, gauges, and parts. So this shouldn't be too hard other than just the time it takes to do it. So what I'm doing is PB Blaster, as from what I've found with the Hurricane, is better at actually getting rusted stuff unstuck. This thing has been my go-to device with the Hurricane. So what I'm doing is everything on these instrument clusters is very fragile, so you want to go real slow and real careful. So all I'm doing is just putting a little bit of blaster down in here behind this football, which is these guys. And what these guys do is these guys go into several of the smaller gauges, and basically it connects this to these in here, and then there's a through hole here which bolts it all together and probably grounds it. I'll get all this. I'll get all the wiring sorted out later, but for now I'm just cleaning everything I've got. So hit it first with the PB Blaster, then only later do you want to use WD-40 after you've got everything clean. So now I'm just going to continue to just strip and clean this whole thing, get it all down to the basics, and then I'm going to start putting it back together, testing each part one at a time. I've got a power supply over here. I got this power supply that is a, this is just a wall wart. It's like a phone charger or something, but it puts out 5 volts. So it's perfect for testing all this stuff, because I don't want to put too much voltage into something that might have damage from the Hurricane. So I want everything nice and clean and dry. Test it all with a low voltage, and then just start putting it together, and you know, hopefully then start going back and forth to the car and see what works and see what doesn't. That's basically the name of the game. Okay, I'm working my way through this instrument cluster, and the tachometer is the most complicated of the gauges. My solenoid that resets the trip odometer is completely frozen solid. Basically, in a Hurricane situation, what happens is any really fine wires, like this was not in the Hurricane, any really fine wires like this just rust to nothing. They just, you know, so anything that's smaller than, you know, anything that's near human hair is gone. And in this solenoid for your trip odometer, there is a spring and some windings, and they're you know, that's definitely gone. So I'm stripping this out, and as I'm stripping it, you get to these little white pins. You can see here's one, here's a couple, and they're a little tricky, but you can see what's going on the back side of these pins. Here we go, there's one. There's what's going on the back side of the pins. So they don't have a sharp edge. They don't have a sharp edge right here. So you can get these out by just putting pressure and, you know, by pulling from this side. But it's a little tricky to get something like this on there. So I use the Magnum. Oh, that's a knife. I use that. It's getting a little scary there with the size of that knife. So I get something underneath here like this, work a little bit on each side very gently, and then get a hold of them with something like this, and you can just gently pull it out and be real slow when you do it, because this is that plastic, and you can see it's already delaminated a little bit right here. My older instrument cluster that originally came with the car, it was much more delaminated around these edges. Okay, so now I'm cleaning all these contacts, and what I'm doing here is I'm just very gently scraping off this green corrosion, because this is what gets on all the contacts from the flood waters, and so it starts to corrode that copper. But underneath the copper is more copper. So copper is one of the most recycled metals because it's easy to get the impurities out and make new things with it. And that is good for our case because most of the wiring is copper. So if you can get the corrosion off the surface and get down to the original metal, then you're good. But by scratching all of this like this, I'm also creating a lot of areas for more corrosion. So I'm gonna hit it with a little bit of this stuff. This is a metal surface prep pad. Just very gentle. All this stuff, just take your time. But copper, there's copper that's been around since the Roman times that just keeps getting reused and reused. The only place where you really need the virgin copper is in integrated circuits and chips and all that, more circuit board stuff. This will be fine if none of these traces are damaged. Now, I've got a little bit of trouble here where this has corroded quite a bit, but this is pretty much the worst spot. That's an old fix from a long time ago, before the hurricane. All this stuff has to be cleaned. This is your most important thing on these instrument clusters, because that is your charge light. Your lets you know. So I'm going to get all this stuff sorted out first. This is #1 priority. So you got to find where all these are connected to, make sure they're all good, and go around this whole thing, all these connections. You can see, here's one I haven't done yet. You can see it's green. This one's broke right there. But that one's been broke for a long time. This goes to one of the warning lights up here in the middle that doesn't matter to me anyway. So that's what I'm doing, getting it cleaned up. If theoretically, if I get it all clean, I put only clean parts in, most of it'll work, but we'll see. I'm giving this instrument cluster probably I'll give it a 76, 78, maybe 80% chance of everything working. I think there's probably a 5% chance that everything works the first time I plug it in. There's just no way. It just hardly ever works out that way. But we'll try. Okay, so what I got going here is I'm testing everything as I go. So you see you got about 1 ohm there. Might be time to buy a new buy a new multimeter. But right here, I'm getting 65, basically on the other side of this very small, there we go. The back side of this, we're getting 86 ohms right there. So as comparison, if I clip this one to here, if I can, it's like watching Operation. This is the Operation episode. It's my turn to operate. Well, you get the idea. Anyway, if you measure that one, it comes out 0 ohms. So what that leads me to believe is in this connection, in this very small connection, there's a physical connection between this wire and this spot. There's something in there, there's corrosion in there. And that's what the hurricane will do to your electronics. So that's why obviously I'm stripping all this. Okay, so I've decided to go ahead and take this whole thing off. And it's in very good condition, so there's just this one spot here, and I think I can get it a little cleaner. So might as well make this a tutorial on how to take these things apart. So what I've got is some blunt nose scissors. Get underneath here. Take this off kind of pin by pin. Take these pins off like this. Anyway, so you get to these things, which are a little complicated, not too bad. There's this black rod there, and the way that works is this black rod pokes through and then through the plastic. And so to get this black rod loose, you get some good short needle nose. You get a hold of that guy right there. And you push down. Anyway, you squeeze and you push down. Here we go. I'll take out the funny bone. Ah! Anyway, it's a lot easier with 2 hands, but it's tricky. So anyway, so just gently get all this stuff loose. I'm gonna get this whole thing out of here, get it on a nice clean table, and really go to town on it and get it really nice and clean. You can see I've already cleaned a lot of it, and it comes pretty clean pretty quick. It's not too bad. Most of them are not too bad, so got to sort out the issue with that guy. Okay, real quick on these. Start over. Okay, real quick on these lights. There's a few that pop through the surface that are smaller, but these are actually the more important lights anyway. So if you're going to take these off of here, you got to be kind of gentle with them, because there's the wires, the leads come through this piece of plastic and then come through into these little receiving things here that are pretty fragile themselves. So you got fragile plugged into fragile, and there's little tabs on the ends of these guys, and so they don't want to pull out easy, but you can pull them out hopefully without breaking them. Luckily for me, I've got lots of spares. But what you do is you grab a hold of it and you kind of push it one way, put a little pressure on it, and gently pull it out just like that. Even after a Category 5 hurricane, that baby just came right out. But this Porsche stuff, even with the electrical, it's complicated and weird looking, but when you get down to it, it's just simple physics. You know, corrosion is going to happen in certain places. Find all those places. You know, when it comes to the speedometer, as complicated as it is, I'm just going to put in another one. I'm not even going to mess with it. But the little things like the bulbs and the connections and all that, basically just going to put it all back together with everything cleaned up, and we'll go from there. So that's your little solenoid that resets the odometer. And the way that works is there's a coil in the hole there, and there's a piston that rides in and out of that. This one's got a fair amount of rust over the years, but this one actually came out of a 928, so hopefully this will work. 93,000 miles. That's good. But anyway, so a lot of times what will happen is this mechanism here will get stuck, and so if you take it apart, then you can get some lube in here on either side. I recommend like Triflow, which is like a Teflon based lubricant, and you can get that at bike shops. That's really good for anytime you don't want an oil. Teflon is better, and it's greaseless. It won't attract dirt like other kind of oils will. And I use it. I got it actually from the BMX racing. I used to put it on my chain. So you take your chain, you leave it in diesel all night, and then you put the Teflon on it. I'm going to clean all this rust off a little bit, but I'm not too worried about it. The main thing is, as I'm kind of just getting my choices of gauges here from the various choices that I have. So that guy goes in there. Get over there. Okay, so there's my speedometer is going to go like that, and I got a tachometer around here somewhere. This guy I've got all picked out for this spot. So I checked all this. This one here I checked with a 12 volts, and it shot up pretty good. And this one here I just checked with the 5 volts, and this one shot up all the way too with 5 volts. So I knew this one could handle 12 volts. Obviously it can handle 16 or whatever, but this one here, just 5 shot it all the way to the top. So just be gentle. That's the key. Just be real gentle. All this stuff breaks so easily. So just loading it up. Okay, a little handheld wrap up on the reassembly. It ended up taking me all day. So if you're going to do this kind of thing, you got to ask yourself if you can find one on eBay for like 150 bucks, 180 for a decent one, or just get a real nice one that looks nice and new for, 250, something like that. Depends on how much your time is worth, because I'd say it took me a good 6 hours, and I've got a lot of extra components, but all in all, I've only spent about 200 bucks total when you add up the two that I bought. One that I bought turned out to be a 928 cluster. You can see this is different than these tabs for the 944. So be careful when you're buying them. It was the mistake of the supplier, but they gave me a really good deal, and it was no big deal. And so, but anyway, so here's all my extra gauges, and this one works. This one probably works. Don't know for sure. I don't know about the other two, but this stuff is all. I know all this stuff works because I tested them all. Okay, and so the other thing that I wanted to mention real quick is if you've got one bad thing, A tachometer could cost you $200 or, you know, $180. You might as well buy a whole, just buy a whole instrument cluster from somebody, and make sure that, obviously make sure it's got the gauge you need in it. But you know, it can't hurt to have lots of extra parts, because I tell you what, if I didn't have a lot of extra parts for this, I never could have pulled this off. And it would have cost me a lot of money. It actually didn't end up costing me anything at all. So, okay, so obviously you've got different... But I wanted to say something about, see the tip on this baby, how small that is? Okay, well, it gets even worse. That tip there will fit into a hole in the back of the indicator. And they're glued on there. So if you want to pull these things apart and do what I did, be prepared. You're gonna break some. Most of these came off okay, but you might have to use some glue to get them back on so that they sit right. So you basically put some glue on there, set it in the right position, and just pray that you can hold it until it dries. And then, you know, I use super glue. I tried that. That seems to work pretty well. You could use epoxy if you were more patient. So here's a real faded one. But this one here, this has got the pin that came with the needle there, with the arm. And so what that means is this came off. This little guy here came off at this juncture. And so then you're left with this tiny, tiny little piece that either comes off or you have to take it off or whatever, but it's a mess. So that's the trickiest fiddly bit part of the whole thing. Cleaned everything with both blaster and also with finished it off, cleaned it off with WD-40. Did a lot of hand work on all these connections, all this stuff. Let me get this in the light here so you can see all those babies. All been resurfaced, cleaned, and then I replaced the plastic tape on the top, because these are real fragile, and if that connector goes over the top and this tape is gone, which a lot of times it just disintegrates over the years because it's real thin, it'll tear that copper. So that's what I'm trying to keep in place. So you can see all these have all resurfaced. All these connections, even though I'm not using any of these, I resurfaced them all. This here got fixed. This guy's good. This all cleaned up. This stuff here is for the fuel mileage stuff, which is not being used anyway, so don't care about that. These football things. But on the back side of these gauges, there is a hole. There's these holes on either side, and they get loose over time. So what you do is you stick a little pick in there and you press on it just a little bit to tighten it up. That's what these guys fit into. So it's just a big game of getting the right tension on everything. And when you put in these bulbs, you got to be real gentle and go real slow getting these bulbs in and out. So that's kind of that. Obviously, you know, you want to clean everything up, make it nice and clean before you put it back together. I've got this just taped for now because I know that there's a good chance that I'm going to have to dig into this thing again. So this is just to get it tested. I might glue it once it's all set up and ready and everything's working. I might do some glue around the edges, but I'll probably just do like a caulk, like a black caulk. That way if you want to take it apart later, you don't have to kill yourself or break it. Because I cracked one of these. Because it was glued on so good by somebody, and I thought I'd get smart and pull it off, and I thought I knew what I was, and I just tiny little chip right there. So okay, so these are my backups. These are all still pretty good. So this is what my whole backup set still. This is all the hurricane stuff. It's done. I'm just, you know, it's just here. And you can see this is 928 too, because it's this is a little different back here. So who knows? Maybe it'd work with a 944. I wasn't going to bother to find out. I just pilfer the gauges. And I'm using a piece of sandpaper wrapped around my Florida Blue card here, and I'm sticking this into these guys to get these connections cleaned up. So basically this is simulating the contacts that are on the instrument cluster. So you stick this in here, and this is just about the right amount of tension. You should be able to slide it in. You can see it's sanding off all those contacts all at once. So I'm doing all these A, B, and C, and getting these clean. Now what you can do and what you should do is, see these little bitty pins? They're like little fingers that grab onto the connections. And so what you can do is get a real small pick, and you can gently squeeze those just a little bit from the top. You want to grab a hold of the top of that finger and push down on it a little bit, and that can tighten these guys up. Now you don't want to make them too tight, because then you got to go around and untighten them, and untighten them is harder than tightening them. So go very slowly, gently tighten those up, and test it as you go with either something you know is a similar size and thickness to the thickness to what you're sticking in there, or actually just try it as you go with the instrument cluster itself. The problem with all this stuff is the more times you jam these things in and out, the more likely something's going to go wrong. So got my steering wheel cam mount back in place. Horn's still not hooked up. So let's see what happens with this instrument cluster. There's nothing left to do now basically but just put it together and turn the car on, see if anything happens. Okay, so here's what we got. We got temperature gauge. That's the most important one. Fuel gauge seems to be working. Can't tell if this one's working or not yet. Tachometer definitely doesn't work. So I think I'm probably gonna put the automatic tachometer back in that spot. Volt gauge isn't working right. And this one is not working right, but it's showing me that I have oil pressure, even though it's not right. You can see, and then my warning light works here. That's the important one. My warning light works over here also, and my warning light, I'm guessing, is going to work over here for my gas, just because it worked before and it's just a bulb, and so the chances of that not working are pretty slim. And then this bulb up here I think works when you first turn it on. Yeah, see, that guy isn't coming on, that warning light in the heat zone, but I can't remember if that comes on when you first start. The key is I got that light working. And let's just see what happens when you do a turn signal. Yeah, turn signal's not gonna work. Not this week. Okay, I think we're doing all right. Well, we got reverse. We got drive. got some gauges, some not. I haven't driven a car in a month, over a month. Oh, and my shift light's working too. Better shift. Hold on, let me find the clutch. Hey, wait a minute, somebody took the clutch. All right. Maiden voyage of success. The Porsche's landed. All right, so we got temperature gauge seems to work right. Gas is pretty much right on from what I remember how much gas is in it. Put in like 5 gallons and it looks right. Speedometer does work. Tachometer doesn't. Oil pressure is letting me know that I've got pressure, but still not right, but it wasn't right before. So that could just be the wrong gauge. Might have to just buy that one probably. And temperature gauge, voltmeter is out, but there's an adjustment screw on the voltmeter, and so there's a very good chance that it's just not adjusted correctly. So we did pretty good. I'd call it, you know, I'd call it a B.